and welcome to the No Wrong Notes podcast, a show hosted by me, Veronica Kokos, holistic voice teacher and singer just like you. Grab a cup of tea, relax, and sit back as we discuss all things singing technique, mindset tips, and more so you can show up as the most confident and creative singer you can be. Hey y'all, and welcome to another episode of the No Wrong Notes podcast. I'm your host, Veronica Kokos, founder of the Veronica Rose Music Lessons Studio, located here in the Richmond, Virginia metro area. In this episode today, we're talking about anxiety. That big, scary topic that it seems like everyone has questions about. I mean, I have students that come into my studio all the time talking about how nervous they are to sing in front of other people. When they start singing in front of others, they start literally physically shaking, like their knees shake, their hands shake, and they're having a physical reaction. I work with students in their lessons, especially these students that really struggle with anxiety, to work with that anxiety. That way they can confidently and comfortably step in front of others and sing. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the anxiety that we feel when singing in front of others. And we're going to be covering 3 big ways to deal with that anxiety. Now, let's get one thing straight here from the get-go. I am not a professional mental health counselor. I'm not a therapist. So I obviously cannot treat anxiety. I cannot cure your anxiety. And if you really feel that your own anxiety is really overwhelming, please seek the help of a qualified mental health professional. With that being said, as I share these tips, I cannot guarantee that you'll never feel anxious on stage again. Personally, when I get up to sing in front of other people, even when I am creating content, like recording this podcast or making content to put on Instagram or TikTok, I still get a little bit nervous when I'm sharing these parts of myself. And I think that even feeling a little bit anxious when you're getting on stage to perform, or even if you're just casually singing in front of friends and family, a little bit of nervousness is totally normal. And honestly, that may never fully go away. But I do have things to offer that can help you work with your anxiety instead of working against it and letting it kind of freeze you up when you sing in front of others. So the first tip I'm going to share here is one that I think is so important for those of us that struggle with anxiety when we're singing in front of others. And that is to shift your mindset to one of compassion. So what I want to say here is that anxiety can feel really scary, but it is crucial to understand that your reactions are ingrained responses to literal years of conditioning by your family, your friends, the world around you. And these years of conditioning aren't just going to go away overnight. And so this is where compassion comes in. When we recognize that these behaviors, like when we start to shake when singing in front of other people, responses like that are the literal result of years of conditioning. And I think that that is so important to remember, especially when you're, feeling like, maybe I shouldn't feel this way. Maybe I shouldn't feel nervous. Everybody else can do it. Why can't I? So this is where I think having compassion for yourself is important. The second that I started offering myself compassion, when I started to feel anxious on stage, when I recognized that, this is the way that I am. I have obviously learned these behaviors somewhere, and even if I feel like I can't control them right in this moment, I'm creating some space to allow for some compassion rather than just beating myself up about it. So having some compassion, I think, is really important. Understanding that when that anxiety comes up, there is a reason for it. And it's worth it to be kind to yourself, not to beat yourself up, not to talk down to yourself, but to just be kind to yourself. Now you might be wondering, well, how am I supposed to be kind to myself? And this is where my second tip comes in. A big way in which you can kind of create that space for compassion is to tap into presence and take a little bit of a reality check. I am not saying to clear your mind or to meditate or anything like that. But what I'm talking about here is tuning into your senses. So this has been something that has been really helpful for me when I'm dealing with anxiety in my own life. You know, when I start to feel that way, I literally turn to my senses. I am naming what I am hearing, what I'm smelling, tasting, seeing, touching, really tuning into my senses and actually naming what I hear, smell, touch, taste, all of that stuff. I'm like actually naming it to myself, because doing that helps me kind of reconnect with my body and get out of my head a little bit. It helps create that space for compassion with myself. And once you feel as if you've kind of calmed down a little bit, you've kind of tuned into the senses, talk to your anxiety like a friend. I know it may not feel easy to talk to your anxiety like a friend, but as we mentioned earlier, your anxiety and your reactions to things in the world are the result of years and years of conditioning. So it's worth it to talk to your anxiety like a friend, to kind of befriend it. Recognize that it is trying to tell you something, but that you got this. You know, when we start to feel anxious when we're singing in front of other people, it's because, you know, maybe we're feeling vulnerable. Maybe we're feeling a little bit threatened. We're like, oh my gosh, what is everybody going to think of me? What is everyone going to think of my voice? And so, you know, our anxiety is trying to tell us something here. It's trying to tell us, you know, look, oh my gosh, look at all these people looking at us. You know, we're anxious because of what they're going to think, yada, yada, yada. And so it's important to acknowledge what your anxiety is trying to tell you, but also recognizing that, hey, you know, I understand that my anxiety is speaking up in this way, but I've also got this. I am in the driver's seat of my life. I am in the driver's seat when it comes to this performance. So understanding that it's okay that that anxiety is coming along for the ride when it comes to your singing, but it can't be in the driver's seat. It can't be the one calling the shots. It's got to be in the passenger seat. And this might feel a little bit out there. It might feel a little bit hard to do at first. And it will take practice. But that practice is so worth it, you guys. Because doing this kind of practice, it really helps us be nicer to ourselves. So that way, instead of freaking out when anxiety comes up, we're taking a moment to reconnect with ourselves, which I think is really important. Now, my third tip for dealing with anxiety when it comes up when you're about to perform is more of a physical practice, and that is to move around and shake it out. So you might have heard this before online, or you might have heard it from other voice teachers, the power of movement and moving your body when it comes to singing, but it's also really helpful for dealing with anxiety when you're about to perform or sing in front of others. So when you're starting to feel anxious, move around. You know, you could literally walk around if you're in a space to do that. You could literally dance it out. That's something that I like to do. Another thing that I like to do is kind of shake. So shaking my hands and my arms and my legs, really trying to physically move that anxiety through my body, letting my body process that anxiety. You know, actually, this is something I've heard in a lot of other podcasts regarding this topic, but there's this idea that the way that animals process anxiety, so like for example, when let's say a rabbit is being chased by a predator, obviously that rabbit is hopping away, it's running away, it's fleeing the scene. And when they've reached safety, that animal, whether it's a rabbit, a gazelle, or, you know, a deer or something like that, they actually physically shake to move some of that anxiety and fear through their bodies. And I think that that's something that us humans can take as a lesson for when it comes to our own anxiety. So just to recap, my little 3 tips here were: 1, moving our mindset to one of compassion. Tip number 2 was to tap into presence, so connecting with your senses and letting your anxiety know that you are in the driver's seat, that it's okay to feel that way, but you are in the driver's seat. And then tip number 3, moving around and shaking it out. And I know all of this is easier said than done. Like I said at the beginning of this, we have a lifetime of ingrained habits and responses. It's literally taken me years to do this kind of work and not feel so anxious on a daily basis anymore. And the truth is that I still feel anxious from time to time. I have days where it is really rough, y'all, but I feel that I'm better able to move through that anxiety and process it than I used to. And like I said, if you really feel that you're struggling with your anxiety, please, please, please seek the assistance of a mental health professional. I am not a mental health professional. As much as people joke sometimes that voice teachers are therapists, no, we are not therapists. I mean, it's obviously possible that there are therapists that teach voice lessons. That is totally a possibility. I'm sure that there are therapists that teach voice lessons out there, but I am not your therapist. And to take on that role and to take on those responsibilities is really irresponsible. I'm not the one that kind of has that kind of specialized mental health training, and so if you feel like you need that kind of help, please seek it out. Now, as I mentioned in our first episode, I like to end each of my voice lessons with my students by asking them what is one big thing that they can take away from that lesson. So, for this week's episode, for your one big thing, your kind of homework, as we say, I would like for you to choose one tip that seems accessible to you and practice that tip anytime anxiety creeps up this week, whether you're singing or not, because these tips that I just shared can be useful whether you're singing or not. All right, guys, that is our episode for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so you can shoot me a DM on Instagram. I am at The Rose Music. You can find that linked in the show notes. I also would love it if you could rate and review the podcast. Give me that 4 or 5 star rating. And if you have some suggestions to make the show even better, I'd love to hear them. You can, again, shoot me that DM on Instagram. You can also give me a follow on TikTok at Sing with Vero. And until next time, happy singing, y'all.